I'm Alara, 32, female, and on my wedding day, my entire family chose to be on a beach in Maui instead of watching me walk down the aisle. That single, calculated act of cruelty wasn't a surprise, not really. It was the grand finale of a lifetime of smaller, quieter betrayals, the closing chapter of a story in which I was always the supporting character in my own life. My fiancé, Daniel, now my husband, was the only one who saw it coming. He had been my rock through the 18 months of wedding planning, a period my family had treated less like a celebration and more like a hostile corporate takeover of my time and resources. Daniel, with his calm eyes and steady heart, had watched my mother, Meredith, critique every choice I made. He'd listened to my father, Richard, sigh theatrically about expenses, as if the company I had single-handedly built into an empire wasn't the source of his overflowing wealth. And he'd witnessed the bored, dismissive shrugs of my brother, Liam, the family's golden child, who couldn't be bothered to remember the date of his own sister's wedding. The dynamic was set in stone long before Daniel entered the picture. I was the engine of the family, and they were the passengers in the first-class cabin. I remembered being 16 and acing my final exams, earning a prestigious scholarship to a top university. That same evening, Liam, who was 18, came home with a report card of mediocre B's and C's. My father clapped him on the back. "That's my boy, knew you had it in you." The next day, a brand new convertible was parked in the driveway with a red bow on the hood, a reward for Liam's hard work. My scholarship was acknowledged with a brief nod and a comment from my mother. "Well, that's practical, Ilara. It will save us a bit of money." I learned then that my success was measured in its utility to them, while Liam's mere existence was a cause for celebration. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. When I was 25, I landed the first multi-million-dollar contract for my father's fledgling construction business. I had spent 6 months preparing the bid, working 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the office. The success of that project was the turning point for the company. At the next major family dinner, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins, my father stood up to give a toast. He raised his glass and spoke of the long, hard years he had put in, the risks he had taken, and the sleepless nights he had endured to land the Henderson account. He never once mentioned my name. I sat there, invisible, a ghost at their feast, watching them toast the patriarch for a victory that was entirely mine. Liam, of course, was praised for bringing a very expensive bottle of wine. Years later, after I had officially taken the title of CFO and multiplied the company's value tenfold, the favoritism was just as blatant. I structured the deals, managed the investments, and secured the financing that allowed my family to live in luxury. My salary was generous, but I reinvested most of it back into the business. Liam was given a vague Director of Marketing title, a corner office with a stunning view, and a corporate expense account he used for lavish lunches and trips with his friends. His primary contribution was designing a new company logo, a project that took him 6 months and was ultimately outsourced to a design firm, paid for by the company, of course. Yet, at every opportunity, Meredith would praise Liam's creative vision and his natural people skills, while my contributions were just expected. I was the reliable, sturdy foundation of the house, but Liam was the fancy, decorative chandelier they showed off to guests. Foundations are essential, but they are buried underground, unseen and unappreciated. So when Daniel proposed, their reaction was predictably cold. They didn't see a loving partner for their daughter, they saw a threat. They saw an outsider who might whisper in my ear and remind me of my own worth. They saw a leak in the pipeline of my devotion, a potential diversion of the resources, my time, my energy, my money, that they had come to see as their birthright. Their disapproval wasn't loud or overt. It was a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts. The way my mother would forget Daniel's name, the way my father would steer every conversation back to quarterly earnings, the way Liam would look at him with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if he couldn't understand why anyone would want to marry the family workhorse. They didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be theirs. And on my wedding day, they made their choice perfectly, brutally clear. The 18 months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in passive aggression, orchestrated primarily by my mother, Meredith. When Daniel and I announced our engagement, her first words, after a painfully long silence, were, "Well, I hope you're getting a prenuptial agreement, Ilara. The business needs to be protected." It wasn't about protecting me, it was about protecting their asset. Daniel, ever the gentleman, simply smiled and said, "Meredith, the only thing I'm interested in is Ilara's happiness. Her finances are her own." This, of course, only confirmed their suspicions that he was a smooth operator, far too clever for their own good. Every step of the planning process became a battleground. We chose a beautiful historic manor for the venue, a place with sprawling gardens and elegant, sunlit rooms. I had loved it since I was a little girl. When I showed my mother the pictures, her nose wrinkled. "It's a bit dated, isn't it? And so far out of the city. Think of the inconvenience for the guests." The guests she was concerned about were her own circle of friends, who she felt were entitled to a level of convenience I was failing to provide. The dress shopping was even worse. I found a gown that felt like it was made for me, simple, elegant, timeless. When I stepped out of the dressing room, my eyes shining, Daniel's mother, who had kindly joined us, teared up and whispered that I looked beautiful. My own mother stood with her arms crossed, her head tilted. "It's very plain, Ilara," she said, her voice flat. "It doesn't have much of a wow factor. You have the budget for something more impressive." Impressive was her code word for expensive and flashy, something that would reflect her status, not my taste. My father, Richard, played his part with a different strategy: financial martyrdom. At every dinner, he would find a way to bring up the wedding costs. "Just saw the invoice for the caterer," he'd say with a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "It's amazing what they charge for a piece of chicken these days." This was coming from a man who thought nothing of dropping 5 figures on a weekend golf trip, all paid for by the corporate accounts I managed and funded. His complaints were a transparent attempt to make me feel guilty, to frame my happiness as an irresponsible financial burden on the family. Daniel saw right through it. "Your dad knows the company had its most profitable quarter ever, right?" He'd ask me gently later that evening as we sat in our condo. "He's not worried about the cost of the wedding, Ilara. He's worried about losing control. They all are." He was right. Their fear was palpable, and it manifested most clearly in their treatment of my brother Liam. I had asked Liam to be a groomsman, a gesture of goodwill I hoped might bridge the ever-widening gap between us. He accepted with a careless shrug, as if I'd asked him to pass the salt. He missed the suit fitting twice, claiming he was swamped at work, a claim I knew was false since I signed his paychecks and reviewed his non-existent progress reports. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were another stark illustration of the divide. My friends threw me a wonderful, warm-hearted weekend at a spa. Daniel's brothers organized a camping trip for him, a rugged, fun-filled affair. Liam agreed to go, but according to Daniel, he spent the entire time complaining about the lack of cell service and trying to convince everyone to ditch the woods for a high-end resort in Vegas. He was a poison pill of entitlement in a setting of genuine camaraderie. The final planning meeting with the venue coordinator took place 2 weeks before the wedding. I had begged my mother to come. She agreed, but then canceled at the last minute, claiming a migraine. I knew it was an excuse. She simply didn't want to participate in something that was truly and completely mine. As I sat there with Daniel, making final decisions on floral arrangements and seating charts, a profound sadness washed over me. This was supposed to be a joyous time, a moment to share with the people who loved me most. Instead, it felt like I was dragging my family kicking and screaming toward a day they fundamentally resented. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, placing his hand over mine on the table. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a lot to think about." "You know," he said softly, his gaze steady and full of understanding, "it's okay if they don't share our joy. Their feelings don't have to affect yours. This day is about us. Just you and me. Everyone else is just a bonus." He was right. He was my future. They were my past. I held onto his words like a lifeline, repeating them to myself over and over. This day is about us. I had no idea how much I would need that mantra, or how soon it would be the only thing I had left to cling to. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the bridal suite, casting a golden glow on the room. Outside, the gardens of the manor were pristine, a perfect storybook setting. My bridesmaids were buzzing with excitement, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings as they had their hair and makeup done. For a few precious hours, I allowed myself to forget the tension, to simply float on the tide of joy and anticipation. My dress H. Hung on the door, a beacon of promise. Today I was going to marry Daniel, the love of my life. My maid of honor, Sarah, handed me a glass of champagne. To the bride, she cheered, and the room erupted in agreement. I took a sip, the bubbles dancing on my tongue, and felt a genuine smile spread across my face. It was real. It was happening. Then my phone, lying on the vanity, buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting a good luck message from a cousin or a friend. The screen lit up with my mother's name, Meredith. A small, anxious knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't heard from her, my father, or Liam all morning, which was strange even for them. I assumed they were getting ready at their hotel and would be arriving soon. I opened the text. The words were few, but they were as cold and sharp as shards of glass. Don't expect anyone to show. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a flat, cruel decree. I read it again, and then a third time, certain I had misunderstood. My breath caught in my throat. The champagne glass felt heavy in my hand. Ilara, what is it? Sarah asked, her cheerful expression fading as she saw my face. I couldn't speak, I just held out the phone for her to see. She read the message and her jaw dropped. What, that's a joke, right? A really sick joke. My fingers felt numb as I tried to call my mother. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father, voicemail. I tried Liam, voicemail. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a joke. This was real. They weren't coming. My hands started to shake. The other bridesmaids gathered around, their voices a worried murmur. Why would they do this? On my wedding day, had something happened, an accident? But the text wasn't one of panic, it was one of command. Don't expect anyone. Just then, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my cousin, Chloe, the one member of my extended family I felt truly close to. It wasn't a text, but an Instagram notification with a screenshot attached. The caption read, OMG Alara, I am so sorry. I can't believe they would do this. My heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling hands, I opened the image. It was a photo, bright and sunny. My mother, my father, and my brother were standing on a pristine white sand beach, their arms around each other, smiling broadly for the camera. Behind them, the turquoise water of the ocean sparkled under a tropical sun. They were all wearing resort wear linen shirts and sundresses. My father was holding a brightly colored drink with a tiny umbrella in it. It was a picture of pure, carefree happiness. And then I saw the caption, posted from my brother's account not 10 minutes earlier. 7 words that shattered the last remaining fragments of my heart. Finally together, Maui family time. Finally together. As if I had been the obstacle. As if my wedding day was the perfect opportunity for them to finally escape me and be the perfect, happy family they always wanted to be. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just skipped my wedding. They had replaced it. They had flown across the world to stage a public declaration of my exclusion. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that follows a devastating explosion. The frantic worry vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The hurt was immense, a physical ache in my chest, but beneath it something else was crystallizing. Anger, pure, undiluted, and clarifying. Sarah was already on the phone with Daniel, her voice low and furious. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden where I was supposed to walk down the aisle in less than an hour. The front row of seats, reserved for my family, would be empty. Every guest would see it. They would all know. A moment later, Daniel burst into the room, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He didn't say a word. He just came straight to me and wrapped me in his arms, holding me tightly as a single, hot tear finally escaped and rolled down my cheek. I am so sorry, Alara, he whispered into my hair. I will never forgive them for this. He pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "We don't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can call it off. We can leave right now, whatever you want." I looked at his face, at the sincere love and protective fury there, and I saw my future, my real family. And then I looked at the phone, at the picture of them smiling on a beach in Maui. My past. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're not calling it off. I'm not letting them take this from me too. This day is about us, you were right." I took a deep breath, picking up my phone one last time. I opened my brother's post, looked at the smiling faces, and sent a single text to the family group chat, a message I knew all three of them would see. Perfect timing. Then I blocked their numbers, handed my phone to Sarah, and said, "It's time for me to put on my dress." Walking down the aisle felt Ike floating through a dream. My arm was linked tightly with Daniel's father, a kind, wonderful man who had stepped in without a moment's hesitation, his eyes filled with a paternal warmth I had so rarely received from my own dad. Every head was turned towards me, and I could feel their gazes, a mixture of pity, confusion, and support. But I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead, at Daniel, who stood waiting for me at the altar, his expression one of unwavering love and admiration. The empty front row was a gaping wound in the otherwise perfect scene. It screamed a message louder than any vow. But as I reached Daniel and he took my hand in his, the sting of that emptiness began to fade. His grip was solid, real. He was here. He had chosen me. In that moment, he was my entire world. We got through the ceremony, our vows taking on a profound new meaning. When I promised to forsake all others, the words caught in my throat, heavy with the weight of the family I was leaving behind. Daniel squeezed my hand, a silent message of support. The reception was a strange mix of joy and somber reality. News of my family's betrayal had spread quickly through the guests. There were no whispers or stares, only an overwhelming outpouring of love. Friends I hadn't seen in years came up to hug me, telling me how strong I was. Daniel's family enveloped me completely, treating me not as a new in-law, but as one of their own. His mother held my hand and told me, "Family isn't just about blood, Alara. It's about who shows up. And we will always show up for you." Despite their kindness, a part of me remained detached, observing the celebration from a distance. The cold fury that had solidified in the bridal suite had not thawed. It sat in my core, a block of ice waiting for the right moment to be put to use. Later that night, back in the quiet luxury of the hotel's honeymoon suite, the weight of the day finally settled. The beautiful white dress lay pooled on a chair, and I had changed into a simple silk robe. Daniel sat beside me on the sofa, holding a glass of water for me as if I were a fragile patient. "How are you really?" he asked softly. "I'm angry," I said, the words coming out with a startling clarity. "I'm not just hurt anymore. I'm furious. They didn't just abandon me. They tried to humiliate me. They tried to ruin the most important day of my life to make a point." "They did," he agreed, his jaw tight. "And they did it because they're weak and they're scared." I looked at him, my mind already turning over the gears of what had to happen next. The business. It had always been the center of our family's universe, the source of their power and my servitude. They had used it to control me for years. Now I would use it to free myself. "They think they're untouchable," I said, my voice low and hard. "They're on a beach in Maui, spending company money, laughing about how they put me in my place. They think I'll just cry for a few days and then come crawling back to run the numbers, because that's what I've always done." I stood up and walked over to the desk where my laptop bag sat. I pulled it out and set it on the table. Daniel watched me, his expression unreadable but supportive. "What are you doing?" he asked. "What I should have done 5 years ago," I replied, powering on the machine. "I'm resigning." I explained the corporate structure to him, a web I had meticulously built myself. I was not just the CFO, I was a signatory on every major account, a named partner on the corporate charter, and my digital credentials were the master key to the entire financial kingdom. My father was the CEO and my brother was a director, but their power was superficial. I held the real authority. They had given it to me because they were too lazy and incompetent to manage it themselves, never once imagining I would ever use it against them. For the next hour, fueled by a righteous, cleansing fire, I methodically dismantled the prison they had built around me. First, I drafted a formal letter of immediate resignation and sent it to the company's legal counsel and the board, which consisted of my father, my mother, and me. Next, I logged into the corporate banking portal. With a series of clicks, I exercised my authority as a charter partner. I froze every single corporate expense account. Liam S. Richards Meredith's, the cards they were likely using to pay for their Maui hotel, their fancy dinners, their private excursions, they were now useless pieces of plastic. Finally, the biggest move. I accessed the documents for the business charter itself. As a founding partner with a significant equity stake, I had the legal right to initiate a dissolution or a buyout of my shares. I filled out the preliminary digital paperwork, citing irreconcilable differences and a hostile takeover of my personal life by other board members, and submitted it to our corporate attorneys. This would trigger an immediate audit and a legal fine. Storm that my father was completely unprepared to handle. I pulled my name, my reputation, and my capital out of the foundation of the company. When I was done, I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was absolute. I felt light. The weight of years of resentment, of being taken for granted, had lifted. Daniel came and stood behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Are you sure?" I looked at our reflections in the dark screen of the laptop. My face was calm, resolute. "They set a fire," I said. "I'm just making sure they can't escape the flames." That night, I didn't just get a husband. I got my life back. We left for our honeymoon in Italy the following day. The 10-hour flight was a blessedly quiet cocoon, a space suspended between the life I had just demolished and the one I was about to build. For the first time in years, my phone was off. There were no urgent emails from the office, no passive-aggressive texts from my mother, no entitled demands from my brother. The silence was deafening, and it was beautiful. Our destination was a small, secluded villa on the Amalfi Coast, perched on a cliff overlooking the impossibly blue Mediterranean Sea. It was a place of peace, of ancient stone and fragrant lemon groves. As Daniel and I stood on our private terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, the chaos of the wedding felt a world away. The first few days were a gentle process of healing. We talked about everything but my family. We explored winding cobblestone streets, ate incredible food, and simply enjoyed the quiet intimacy of being newlyweds. Daniel was extraordinary. He seemed to know exactly what I needed, whether it was a long, silent walk along the coast or a distracting, funny story about his childhood. He gave me the space to breathe. But the silence from my family was a presence in itself. I knew they would have landed back home by now. They would have discovered their credit cards were declined. They would have seen my resignation email. The fact that they hadn't tried to contact me, not even with a furious, incoherent text, was telling. It meant they were either too arrogant to believe I would go through with it, or they were scrambling, trying to figure out how to regain control without me. My guess was the latter. My father likely thought he could bully the bank, or the lawyers, into reversing my actions. He was about to get a rude awakening about the limits of his influence when I wasn't the one guaranteeing his credit. On our fourth day in Italy, sitting at a sun-drenched cafe, I pulled out a notebook. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a clear, focused ambition. "What's that?" Daniel asked, sipping his cappuccino. "A business plan," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. For years, I had harbored a secret dream. I wanted to start my own financial consulting firm, one that specialized in helping small to mid-sized businesses navigate the complexities of growth and investment. I had the skills, the experience, and most importantly, the contacts. Dozens of clients I had worked with at my family's company were loyal to me personally, not to the brand. They respected my expertise and my integrity. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes alight with interest. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I sketched out a vision for a company built on principles of transparency and partnership, the very things my family's business lacked. It would be our company. We would build it together, on our own terms. Daniel, with his background in marketing and his innate understanding of people, would be the perfect partner. As I talked, laying out strategies for client acquisition, financial modeling, and branding, I felt a familiar energy surge through me. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the stressful, draining energy of trying to keep a toxic enterprise afloat. It was the exhilarating, creative energy of building something from scratch, something that was entirely mine. By the end of our honeymoon, we had a name for our new firm, a detailed launch plan, and a list of potential clients to contact the moment we got home. The trip that had started as an escape had transformed into a foundation. We weren't just healing, we were planning a future that was brighter and more promising than anything I had ever imagined. The silence from my family continued for the entire 2 weeks. Not a single call, text, or email. It was the greatest gift they had ever given me. It allowed me to fully detach, to see them for what they were, a chapter in my life that was now definitively closed. As our plane descended back towards home, I didn't feel sadness or regret. I felt a quiet, powerful sense of anticipation. The storm was waiting for me, I knew. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. We had been back in our condo for exactly 1 week. The transition from the serene Italian coast to our life back home was jarring, but we were Ed with a sense of purpose. We had already filed the paperwork for our new business, Phoenix Consulting, and I had spent the past few days reaching out to my most trusted former clients. The response was overwhelmingly positive. It seemed my reputation had preceded me. The silence from my family had finally broken, but not in the way one might expect. There were no apologies, no questions, just a slow trickle of chaos that I observed from a distance. One of our former lead contractors called me to ask why the funding for the downtown high-rise project had been suddenly frozen. A supplier sent me a panicked email because a 7-figure invoice was past due. I politely directed them all to my father, Richard, the CEO. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, the real storm made landfall. It started with a series of frantic, blocked calls that my phone's log registered as coming from my father. Then came the texts, a barrage of furious, misspelled messages filled with capital letters and exclamation points. Card declined at the club. What did you do? The bank won't talk to me. Call them now. Answer your phone, ELARA. This is not a joke. I read them calmly, deleted them, and took a sip of the fresh coffee Daniel had just made for me. We were sitting at our small kitchen island, reviewing a draft of our new company website. Then came the sound we had been expecting, a furious, rhythmic pounding on our front door. Bam, bam, bam. It was loud, aggressive, and filled with the impotent rage of a man who had lost control. Daniel looked at me, his eyebrows raised. "Showtime," he murmured. I smiled, a genuine calm smile. "I've got this." I stood up, holding my warm coffee mug, and walked to the door. I took a deep breath, not of apprehension but of resolve. Then I opened it. My father stood on the other side, his face a blotchy, alarming shade of red. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a mess. He looked like he had run all the way to my door. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. "What have you done?" he bellowed, his voice hoarse. He didn't say hello, he didn't ask how I was, he didn't mention the wedding. His first words were an accusation. I leaned against the doorframe, took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, and looked him directly in the eye. My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. "The Henderson project is about to collapse," he yelled, jabbing a finger in the air. "Our credit line is frozen. The entire company is grinding to a halt. You have 5 minutes to fix this, Alara. 5 minutes, or you are in breach of your fiduciary duty." I almost laughed. Fiduciary duty. He was throwing legal terms at me that he barely understood, terms I had taught him. "My fiduciary duty," I said, my voice even and quiet, ended the moment I submitted my resignation. You, on the other hand, as the acting CEO, might want to be careful. Using corporate funds for a lavish family vacation while intentionally sabotaging a major company partner, me, could be seen as a significant breach of your own duties. His face went from red to pale. He hadn't expected me to have a defense. He had expected me to crumble, to apologize, to fix his mess as I always had. This is not about the trip, he sputtered, waving his hand dismissively. This is about you throwing a childish tantrum and trying to destroy this family's legacy. My tantrum, I replied, my voice dangerously soft. Let me be very clear, Dad. You and Mom and Liam made a choice. You chose to abandon me on my wedding day. You chose to publicly humiliate me. You chose to send a message that I was not part of the family. I heard you. Message received. I took another sip of my coffee. That morning, I continued, I just sent one text back to you all. Perfect timing. And it was. It was the perfect time for me to realize that I'm done. I'm done funding your lifestyle. I'm done cleaning up your messes. I'm done being the engine for a train I'm not even allowed to ride on. He opened his mouth to shout again, but I cut him off, my voice as sharp and final as a guillotine's blade. I said, it looks like you finally have to pay for your own vacation, Dad. I've started the process of dissolution. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. The color drained completely from his face. He stared at me, his mouth agape, the fury in his eyes replaced by something I had never seen there before, genuine fear. He finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. You can't, he whispered, the fight gone from his voice. The company, it's everything. It was everything to me too, I said, my voice softening with a touch of real sadness. And you threw it all away for a week in Maui. With that, I slowly and deliberately closed the door in his face, clicking the deadbolt into place. I leaned against the door for a moment, the faint sound of his stunned silence on the other side. Then I turned around and walked back to my husband, and to my new life, without looking back. A year can change everything. 12 months after I closed the door on my father's red, furious face, I was sitting in a bright, modern office with Phoenix Consulting etched in elegant silver letters on the glass door. Sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the bustling city below. Across the desk, Daniel was on a call, his expression a mix of professionalism and easy charm. He caught my eye and gave me a quick, reassuring wink before turning his attention back to his client. Our firm was more than just surviving, it was thriving. As I had predicted, my most valuable clients had jumped ship from my family's old company and signed on with us almost immediately. Our reputation for integrity, transparency, and most importantly, results, spread quickly. We were hiring new analysts and had a waiting list of potential clients. We had built something from the ashes, something strong and beautiful and entirely ours. News about my former family and their company trickled in through industry gossip and the occasional, awkward phone call from a concerned mutual acquaintance. The story was as predictable as it was tragic. Without my financial management and strategic oversight, the company had begun to crumble. My father, in his panic, had made a series of disastrous decisions, trying to secure high-risk loans to cover the operational shortfalls. Liam, left in charge of marketing, had apparently spent a fortune on a rebranding campaign that did nothing to fix the fundamental rot within the business. Projects were behind schedule, key employees had resigned, and their once sterling credit was shot. They were a ship taking on water, with a captain who only knew how to yell at the waves. About 6 months after the confrontation, I received a long, rambling email from Liam. It was a bizarre blend of accusation and desperate pleading. He blamed me for ruining everything, for being selfish and vindictive. He talked about how much pressure he was under, how Dad was impossible to work with, how Mom cried all the time. Buried near the end was the real point of the message, a half-hearted, manipulative suggestion that if I would just help them sort out the finances, maybe we could all start to heal. I read the email once, archived it without replying, and went on with my day. The final nail in their coffin came 3 months ago. I learned through a former colleague that they had been forced to file for bankruptcy. The legacy my father was so desperate to protect had been reduced to legal filings and liquidation sales. They had lost the business, the luxurious home, the club memberships, everything that my hard work had provided for them. They were, as my brother's cruel caption had once boasted, finally together. But now they were together in a cramped, rented apartment, facing the consequences of their choices. I felt a strange sense of detachment hearing the news, not joy or satisfaction, but a quiet, somber finality. Their story was no longer my story. It was a cautionary tale I observed from a great distance. My life, in contrast, was full of a quiet, steady joy I had never known. My relationship with Daniel was a true partnership, built on mutual respect and unwavering support. His family had become my family, embracing me with a warmth and acceptance that was still, at times, overwhelming. We hosted holidays, celebrated birthdays, and showed up for each other, no questions asked. I was finally learning what real family felt like. This afternoon, as I looked out my office window, I thought back to that sunny day in Maui. I thought about the caption, "Finally together." In their arrogance, they believed my absence was the key to their happiness. In a way, they were right. My absence was the key, not to their happiness but to mine. By cutting me out, they had inadvertently set me free. They had forced me to build my own world, one where I was valued, respected, and loved. I am Alara, 33, female, and I am the co-founder of a successful company. I am a wife to a wonderful man and a cherished member of a loving family. The path here was paved with betrayal and heartbreak, but I wouldn't change a single step of the journey. I lost a family, but I found myself. And that is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. So to anyone out there feeling invisible, unappreciated, or trapped by the expectations of others, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to walk away, close the door, and start building your own room with your own view.